Imagine an eye the size of a basketball. Now imagine that eye belonging to an animal that can vanish into the inky blackness of the deep sea, an animal so elusive that for centuries it was considered nothing more than a myth. We're talking, of course, about the giant squid, Architeuthis ducks. For decades, scientists have been trying to unravel the mysteries surrounding this colossal cephalopod, piecing together clues from rare sightings, stranded carcasses, and the occasional lucky encounter caught on camera. We thought we were getting somewhere, starting to understand its behavior, its habitat, even its place in the vast oceanic food web. But what we thought we knew about Architeuthis ducks was about to be completely rewritten, and the story begins not in some far-flung ocean trench, but in a museum basement, filled with jars and the ghosts of marine biology past. This particular basement belonged to the Reykjavik Maritime Museum in Iceland. Now, Iceland might not be the first place that springs to mind when you think of giant squid, but this island nation, perched on the edge of the Arctic Circle, has a surprisingly long history with these enigmatic creatures. The cold, nutrient-rich waters surrounding Iceland provide a fertile feeding ground for many marine animals, and occasionally a giant squid will wander into these waters, either following a food source or simply getting lost. Most of the time, these encounters end with the squid retreating back into the depths, but sometimes, tragically, they end with the squid washing ashore. And that's exactly what happened back in 2013. A dead giant squid, relatively fresh, was discovered on a remote beach on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula. Now, the locals were, understandably, both shocked and fascinated. Giant squid strandings are rare events anywhere in the world, and to have one show up on your doorstep is something you don't forget. The squid was quickly transported to the Reykjavik Maritime Museum, where it was carefully measured, photographed, and then, following standard protocol, preserved for further study. It was a magnificent specimen, even in death. But it wasn't until Dr. Birger Sigurdsson, a marine biologist with a particular interest in cephalopods, started his detailed examination that things started to get weird. Birger had spent years studying squid, both large and small. He knew their anatomy, their behavior, their quirks. He had dissected hundreds of them, and he knew that something about this particular squid just wasn't right. At first, it was subtle, a slight asymmetry in the tentacles, an unusual texture to the skin. But the more he looked, the more anomalies he found. It was like the squid was misassembled. He began by comparing the Snæfellsnes specimen with other giant squid specimens held in museums around the world. He pored over scientific papers, comparing measurements, anatomical diagrams, and even old photographs. And the more he compared, the more convinced he became that this wasn't just a slightly unusual giant squid. This was something else entirely. The proportions were off. The arrangement of the suckers was different. Even the internal organs seemed to be in the wrong place. It was as if evolution had taken a detour, creating something that looked like a giant squid, but wasn't quite. One of the most striking differences was in the squid's beak. The beak, or rostrum, is a hard, chitinous structure that the squid uses to tear apart its prey. It's one of the most robust parts of the squid's body, and it can often survive long after the rest of the animal has decomposed. As such, it's a valuable tool for identifying different species of squid. Birger carefully extracted the beak from the Snæfellsnes specimen and compared it to the beaks of other giant squid. And what he found was perplexing. The shape was all wrong. It was too broad, too blunt, and the internal structure was completely different. It looked more like the beak of a colossal squid, Architeuthis hamiltoni, than a giant squid. Now, the colossal squid is another species of giant squid, even larger and more mysterious than Architeuthis ducks. It lives in the frigid waters of the Southern Ocean near Antarctica, and it's rarely seen. To find characteristics of a colossal squid in a giant squid from the North Atlantic was, well, it was like finding a penguin in the Sahara Desert. It just didn't make any sense. Berger initially dismissed it as a fluke, a developmental abnormality. But the more he looked, the more he realized that this wasn't just one isolated anomaly. It was a pattern, a consistent set of differences that set this squid apart from all the others. He started to wonder if he had stumbled upon a new species of giant squid, one that had somehow managed to remain hidden from science. Or perhaps it was a hybrid, a cross between a giant squid and a colossal squid. The idea seemed outlandish, but the evidence was starting to stack up. He knew he needed more data, more evidence to support his hypothesis. So he decided to take a closer look at the squid's DNA. He carefully extracted a sample of tissue from the Snæfellsnes specimen and sent it off to a lab for sequencing. The results came back a few weeks later, and they were even more baffling than he could have imagined. The DNA sequence was unlike anything he had ever seen. It shared some similarities with the DNA of other giant squid, but there were also significant differences, stretches of DNA that were completely unique. It was as if the squid had been assembled from spare parts, using genetic material from different sources. The implications were staggering. If this was indeed a new species of giant squid, it would rewrite our understanding of cephalopod evolution. It would force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about these enigmatic creatures. But there was also another possibility, a more unsettling possibility. What if this squid wasn't a product of natural evolution at all? What if it was something else entirely? Something artificial? The thought sent a shiver down Berger's spine. It was crazy, he knew, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was going on. The squid's unusual anatomy, its bizarre DNA, it all pointed to something unnatural. He decided to keep his findings secret for now. He knew that if he went public with his suspicions, he would be ridiculed. He needed more evidence, more proof to back up his claims. So he continued his research, delving deeper into the mysteries of the Snæfellsnes squid. He spent countless hours in the museum basement, poring over anatomical diagrams, analyzing DNA sequences, and comparing the squid to other specimens. The more he learned, the more he realized that he was dealing with something truly extraordinary, something that defied explanation. And the closer he got to the truth, the more he realized that he was stepping into a world of secrets, a world where the boundaries between science and science fiction were blurred, a world where the impossible was suddenly possible. He felt like he was on the verge of uncovering something huge, something that could change our understanding of life on Earth. But he also knew that he was playing a dangerous game. Someone or something didn't want him to know the truth, and they would stop at nothing to keep him silent. The question was, would he be able to uncover the truth before it was too late? The salt-laced air of the museum basement clung to Dr. Aris Thorne like a second skin. He adjusted his glasses, the dim light glinting off the lenses as he peered at the rows of specimen jars. Each held a piece of the ocean's puzzle, a fragment of a world he was determined to understand. But it was the giant squid specimens that held his attention now, specifically the anomalous genetic markers he'd discovered. He pulled up the sequencing data on his laptop, the lines of code, a familiar language he could read fluently. The anomalies were still there, glaringly out of place. They weren't just random mutations. They were structured, almost deliberate. It was as if someone had intentionally rewritten parts of the squid's DNA. But who and why? Thorne rubbed his tired eyes. He'd been working around the clock, fueled by caffeine and a burning curiosity. He knew he was close, but the answers remained elusive, hidden beneath layers of scientific jargon and bureaucratic red tape. He decided to take a break, stepping away from the computer and pacing the narrow aisle between the specimen shelves. He ran a hand along the cool glass of a jar containing a particularly large tentacle. The sheer size of the thing was awe-inspiring, a testament to the power and mystery of the deep sea. His thoughts drifted back to the incident at the research vessel, the coordinated attack, the strange bioluminescence. It all pointed to a level of intelligence and organization that was unheard of in giant squid. Could these genetic anomalies be the key to unlocking that mystery? Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. The basement was supposed to be empty, locked and secured for the night. But there, in the shadows, near the far end of the aisle, he saw a figure. It was a man, tall and slender, his face obscured by the dim light. He was dressed in a dark suit, and there was something unsettlingly familiar about his posture, the way he held himself. "Who's there?" Thorn called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. The figure didn't answer. He simply stood there, motionless, watching Thorn with an unnerving intensity. Thorn took a step forward, his hand reaching for the emergency alarm on the wall. Quote line 1. The figure finally moved, stepping out of the shadows and into the dim light. Thorn gasped. He recognized him. It was the same man he'd seen on the security footage from the research vessel, the one who had been observing the squid attack. "You," Thorn said, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you want?" The man smiled, a chillingly artificial expression that sent a shiver down Thorn's spine. Quote 4, he said, his voice smooth and menacing. Thorn knew he was in danger. This man wasn't just a curious observer. He was an active participant in whatever was going on with the giant squid. And he was here to stop Thorn from uncovering the truth. "I know about the genetic anomalies," Thorn said, trying to buy himself some time. "I know you've been tampering with the squid's DNA." The man's smile widened. Quote 7, he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small metallic device. It looked like a remote control. Quote 8, Thorn asked, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape route. The man ignored him. He pointed the device at one of the specimen jars, the one containing the largest tentacle. He pressed a button on the device. A high-pitched whine filled the air, barely audible to the human ear. The water in the jar began to vibrate, and the tentacle inside twitched. Thorn felt a surge of adrenaline. He didn't know what the device was doing, but he knew it couldn't be good. He lunged forward, trying to grab the device from the man's hand, but the man was too quick. He sidestepped Thorn's attack and pressed the button again. The whine intensified, and the tentacle in the jar began to writhe violently. Suddenly, the glass of the jar shattered, sending shards of glass and water flying in all directions. The tentacle flopped out of the jar, landing on the floor with a sickening thud. But it wasn't just a tentacle anymore. It was alive, pulsating with an unnatural energy. It began to move, slithering across the floor towards Thorn. Thorn stumbled backwards, his eyes wide with terror. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew he had to get out of there. He turned and ran, the sound of the slithering tentacle echoing behind him. He could feel the man's eyes on him, watching his every move. He burst out of the basement and into the main hall of the museum, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he couldn't stay here. He had to get help. But as he reached for his phone, he realized something was wrong. The museum was eerily silent, and the lights were flickering. He looked out the windows and saw that the streets outside were deserted. It was as if the entire world had been frozen in time. He felt a cold dread creep over him. He was alone, trapped in a silent, empty world with a man who wanted him dead and a giant squid tentacle that was very much alive. And he had a feeling that this was just the beginning. The game had changed, the stakes had been raised, and he was running out of time. The secrets of the deep were rising to the surface, and they were hungry for more than just knowledge. They were hungry for control, and maybe even revenge. He knew one thing for certain. His life, and perhaps the fate of the world, depended on unraveling this terrifying mystery before it consumed him entirely, and before the unnatural power unleashed in that basement spread beyond the museum walls and into the unsuspecting world. The silence was broken only by the distant, chilling echo of something large, moving. He strained his ears, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. What was that sound? It was low, guttural, almost like a whale song, but distorted, wrong. It vibrated through the floor, up his legs, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. He pulled out his phone, the flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. He had to find the source, had to understand what was happening before it was too late. He moved slowly, cautiously, deeper into the basement's labyrinthine corridors. The air grew colder, damper, and the metallic tang of salt grew stronger, almost overwhelming. He passed rows of forgotten exhibits, shrouded in dust sheets, their shapes looming like ghostly figures in the dim light. A shiver ran down his spine. He felt like he was being watched, scrutinized by unseen eyes. Suddenly, he stopped. Ahead, a faint, pulsing light emanated from behind a heavy steel door, the kind usually reserved for storage of hazardous materials. This wasn't on any of the museum blueprints he'd studied. He hesitated. Should he open it? Was he ready for what he might find? He took a deep breath and reached for the handle. It was cold, slick with moisture. He pulled, and with a groaning screech that echoed through the basement, the door swung inward, revealing a chamber bathed in an eerie, bioluminescent glow. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. In the center of the room, suspended in a massive tank filled with swirling, phosphorescent water, was the giant squid. But it was different now. It wasn't the lifeless, preserved specimen he'd expected. This was alive. Its enormous eye, easily the size of a dinner plate, swiveled to meet his gaze. A shiver ran down Thorne's spine, a primal fear mixed with an overwhelming sense of awe. The air hummed with an energy he couldn't explain, a palpable vibration that resonated deep within his bones. The squid pulsed with a soft, internal light, its skin shifting through a kaleidoscope of colors, deep blues, vibrant greens, flashes of crimson. It was a living aurora borealis, contained within the confines of its colossal form. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The squid thrashed weakly, its massive tentacles twitching in a chaotic, uncoordinated dance. It was clearly in distress. Thorne cautiously approached the tank, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see now that the water wasn't just phosphorescent. It was filled with microscopic organisms, swirling and clustering around the squid like a protective shroud. They seemed to be feeding on it, or perhaps healing it. He couldn't tell. As he got closer, he noticed something else, something that made his blood run cold. Embedded in the squid's mantle, just below its enormous eye, was a metallic object. It was small, almost insignificant compared to the sheer size of the creature, but it was undeniably there, a dark, angular shard glinting amidst the swirling bioluminescence. It looked artificial, man-made. Thorne fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He needed to document this, to record everything he was seeing. But as he raised the phone to take a picture, the lights flickered violently and died, plunging the chamber into darkness. Panic surged through him. He was alone, trapped in the dark, with a distressed, bioluminescent giant squid and a mysterious metallic object embedded in its flesh. He could hear the creature thrashing in the tank, the water sloshing against the glass with a deafening roar. Then, just as suddenly as it had disappeared, the light returned. But it was different now. Brighter, more intense. And the squid was changing. The colors on its skin intensified, swirling faster and faster. The metallic object began to glow with a malevolent red light. The air crackled with energy. Thorn stumbled backward, his mind reeling. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he was witnessing something extraordinary, something terrifying. The squid let out a deafening shriek, a sound that resonated through the entire building. The water in the tank began to boil, and then, with a force that shattered the glass, the squid erupted from the tank, its massive tentacles flailing wildly. Thorn scrambled for the door, desperate to escape. But the squid was too fast. A tentacle snaked out and wrapped around his leg, pulling him back towards the creature. He screamed, clawing at the floor, but it was no use. He was being dragged closer and closer to the monstrous being. As he looked up into the squid's enormous eye, he saw something that terrified him more than anything else. He saw intelligence. Not the simple, instinctive intelligence of an animal, but a cold, calculating awareness. It was as if the squid was looking directly into his soul, assessing him, judging him. And then the squid spoke. The voice was not a sound, not a vibration of air. It was a thought projected directly into Thorn's mind, a voice that echoed in the deepest recesses of his consciousness. Quote, 10, the voice said. Quote, 11. Thorn tried to speak, to plead for his life, but he couldn't. He was paralyzed with fear. "We have been watching you, Dr. Thorn," the voice continued. "We have been watching your world, and we are not pleased with what we see." The squid tightened its grip on his leg, pulling him even closer. He could feel the suction cups on its tentacles, pressing against his skin, drawing his blood. "You have poisoned your oceans, destroyed your forests, and waged war upon yourselves," the voice said. "You are a destructive species, and you are a threat to the balance of this planet." Thorn knew in that moment that he was not just facing a giant squid. He was facing something far more ancient, far more powerful, something that had been lurking in the depths of the ocean for centuries, waiting for its opportunity. The squid raised a tentacle, its tip glowing with the same malevolent red light as the object embedded in its mantle. "Your time is over," the voice said. And then everything went black. But that wasn't the end of the story. Days later, a team of scientists and government officials descended upon the museum. They found the basement in ruins, the tank shattered, and the giant squid gone. Dr. Aris Thorn was missing, presumed dead. The official explanation was that a rare deep-sea earthquake had triggered a freak event, causing the squid to become agitated and escape. The metallic object found embedded in its mantle was dismissed as a piece of debris from a long-lost shipwreck. But some people knew the truth. They knew that something far more sinister had occurred. They knew that the giant squid was not just an animal. It was a messenger, a harbinger of something terrible to come. And they knew that the oceans held secrets that humanity was not ready to face. The disappearance of Dr. Thorn and the escape of the giant squid were just the beginning. The world was about to change in ways no one could have ever imagined. The oceans were rising, the creatures of the deep were stirring, and humanity was about to learn that it was not alone. It never had been. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. Comment what you want to hear next. But as they stared at the empty tank, a chilling realization dawned upon them. The water wasn't just gone, it was different. It shimmered with an unnatural luminescence, a faint ethereal glow that pulsed with an eerie rhythm. What is that?" stammered Maya, her voice barely a whisper above the hum of the facility's emergency generators. "I don't know," replied Ben, his brow furrowed in concern. But it's not normal salt water. It's alive. He reached out a gloved hand towards the shimmering pool, hesitant to touch it. As his fingers neared the surface, the water seemed to recoil, as if sensing his presence. A low, guttural hum emanated from the pool, vibrating through the floor and into their bones. "Don't touch it," Maya warned, pulling him back. "Whatever it is, it's dangerous." Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging the lab into near darkness. The emergency generator sputtered and coughed, struggling to maintain power. A high-pitched whine filled the air, growing louder and more unbearable with each passing second. "What's happening?" Maya screamed, clutching her ears. "I don't know," Ben yelled back, his voice strained. "But I don't like it." As the whine reached its peak, the ground began to tremble. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, and equipment toppled from the shelves. The entire facility seemed to be groaning under immense pressure. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shaking stopped. The whine faded away, replaced by an unsettling silence. The lights flickered back to full brightness.